Here are the 3 things I learned from my first year of podcasting. Number 1, don't assess the value of your podcast on engagement on your posts. Number 2, consistency creates content. And number 3, people show up. Someone's listening. It kind of attributes back to number 1. You may not think someone is listening because of what you see or, what you don't see, but someone's always listening. Now, I'll dive deeper into those topics later in this podcast. Hello. My name is Ed Jones II. I am the founder of Beyond the Field Player Development and the host of this podcast, the Player Development Pod. This podcast is here to bring exposure to the player development field. Thank you so much for joining me. As I said, it's 1 year. This episode. It's March 20th. It is 1 year since I began this podcast. Thank you to everyone who has supported along the way. We're still in season 3, but just wanted to take time and celebrate this first year of podcasting. Like I said, I'm going to share the 3 things I learned from my first year of podcasting, but just want to thank you so much for supporting. And if this is your first time, hey, I got a couple playlists. They're everywhere. You can find them. You'll see them at the end of the video. Jump in the playlist. Go through it, binge player development. Let me know what you think. Before I get started, I want to give a shout out to my alma mater, the Houston Cougars, who are in the Sweet 16. They are coming to my city of Kansas City to face the Miami Hurricanes. I'm so excited for the COOGS. It's awesome to see their staff and what they built there. So go COOGS. Can't wait to see y'all. Now let's dive into it. I've been in podcasting for a year. Some of you all listening to this may want a podcast. Some of you all who may be listening to this have been supporters and just wonder what it's been like for the entire year. The number one thing, as I said earlier, you cannot assess the value of your podcast to what you see. So that could be likes, comments, shares, different things like that. So when I go through my YouTube, I'm like, man, of course you want that reciprocation of, for lack of a better word, value, or that feedback or that engagement. And it was kind of tough at first. I'm like, man, people are texting me like, man, I'm loving your show. And I'm like, hey, please go review. And there's no reviews. I think I have maybe 25 reviews at this point. And I got 55 episodes. And anyway, all that doesn't matter, because what I found out is the value of my podcast, the value of the space that I'm creating here, the value that I'm providing for the people who listen, it goes beyond that. And if I would have looked at the likes, the comments, the different things like that, I would have quit a long time ago. So if you're podcasting, maybe you're starting out, maybe you're in the middle section where it gets really, really tough after about episode 7, please do not assess the feedback. Do not equate the feedback, with value of your podcast. Number two, consistency creates content. So that was the one thing. I was like, I'm going to show up consistently. I want this to be a weekly podcast. This may change here in season 4 as we get to it, but I wanted this to be a weekly podcast. I wanted to show up every week because I knew somebody was listening. And as I showed up, it created content because I had to have things there. And so if you remember the first season, I had the questions of player development. Well, I'm still writing that book. I have everything I need to sit down and write that. But once again, that series created a book. This season, at the beginning of season 3, Head Coach's Guide to Player Development. I was doing, the podcast episodes, and now I wrote a book. I was like, let me just write a book. Let me write a guide for head coaches. That's there. The Player Development Conference. Yes, the Player Development Conference. If you haven't heard about it, it is May 19th, May 20th. It is virtual, but that was created out of consistency. Now we have a conference. People were listening to the podcast. Going back to number 1, I wasn't worried about what I saw, but people were hitting me up and they're like, man, we love what you're doing. We love that you're showing up. We need a conference. And so that consistency created a player development conference. I don't know if it's the first. I'm not here to judge or whatever, or make that proclamation, but it goes back to the consistency created the content. And since we're talking about the Player Development Conference, I want to give a shout out to Athlete Transition Services, or ATS, who is a gold sponsor of the Player Development Conference. We want to thank ATS so much for being a gold sponsor. We are so excited for your commitment, not only to the conference, but to our listeners, our community, and player development directors around the world. Thank you so much, ATS, for being a gold sponsor of the Player Development Conference. If you are interested in sponsoring our conference, that link is in the show notes. But once again, these opportunities came from the consistency of the podcast. And then number 3, Somebody's always listening. So this is really tied into number one, because you don't feel like people are listening because you don't see comments, you don't see likes, you don't see shares, you don't see different things, but somebody's always listening. I expressed this in my last episode with Jonathan Jones, but every single time it got hard, every single time I wanted to stop podcasting or I wanted to quit, somebody always sent me a message, be it a college student, be it professional, be it whoever, my former players, people in professional leagues, just shocked me. People reach out and say, thank you so much for what you're doing. And so if you're podcasting, once again, do not get caught up on numbers. You need analytics. Analytics are not bad because it tells you, what works, what you need to do, different things like that. But do not get caught up in that. Do not make that your central value for your podcast, because somebody is always listening. Somebody's always listening. And it's been great. I've been able to help people who, like, I have different reviews where people are like, I thought I wanted to be in this field. And you know what? I know definitely this is the field for me. So just want to encourage people who are out there podcasting, who are thinking about it, who are starting, anybody is even just creating content. Maybe it's not podcasting. Somebody's always watching. Someone's always listening. So those are the three things I learned in my first year of podcasting. Number one, don't overvalue engagement for your podcast. Number two, consistency helps create content. And number three, someone's always listening. Thank you so much for listening. I got a lot of information in the show notes. I hope you have a great day. Thank you for supporting. And it's been 1 year, y'all. So excited to continue to go, and so excited to eventually share with you all where the Player Development Podcast will go. But my central purpose for this is to bring exposure to the player development field. God bless you. Have a great day. Go out and create generational impact. Don't wait. Create that generational impact today.